A family trip that took a wrong turn. It was the kind of morning that should have been filled with excitement, the kind of day every child dreams about. Heading off to Universal Studios with family. All the promises of adventure and fun waiting to unfold. Emily Johnson could almost hear her son Jacob's excited chatter in her head as she mentally prepared for their day ahead. But for Emily, a single mother balancing work and parenting, the day wasn't as carefree as it seemed on the surface. Her heart raced with 1,000 thoughts. Would she be able to keep up with the schedule, manage the work calls, and still be the mom Jacob needed her to be? She glanced over at her son, his small hands working carefully on a dinosaur puzzle in their modest apartment. Jacob was 6 years old, an introvert by nature, with big brown eyes that mirrored her own. He was focused, completely absorbed in his task, carefully placing one piece of the puzzle next to another. Emily couldn't help but smile. His innocence and concentration were like a reflection of herself when she was a child. Quiet, observant, and perhaps a little misunderstood. "Mom, look, I finished the T-Rex's head." Jacob's voice broke through the silence, and his face was lit with pride. Emily couldn't help but pause her work for a moment, her laptop forgotten on the desk as she watched her son, so absorbed in his world of dinosaurs. "That's amazing, Jacob. You're so close to finishing it," she encouraged him, a warmth filling her chest. Despite her stressful morning of meeting deadlines and last-minute revisions for a client, moments like this with her son were always her refuge, the calm in her storm. But before she could get back to her work, her phone rang. The caller ID flashed "Mom," and Emily's heart sank slightly. She knew her mother, Carol, was always full of advice, sometimes a little too much. "Emily, are you ready for tomorrow?" Carol's voice came through the phone, firm and slightly bossy as usual. "Don't forget to put sunscreen on Jacob. If he gets burned again like last time, we'll have to take him to the dermatologist." "Of course, Mom. I've packed everything," Emily replied, her fingers anxiously tapping on the edge of her desk. "I'll make sure to put sunscreen on him. Don't worry." Carol didn't sound convinced. "Make sure he gets out and runs around a little. You know he's too quiet, too introverted. Kids should be more active, Emily. You spoil him too much." Emily could feel the familiar frustration bubbling inside her. Ever since her divorce, Carol had always been quick to criticize her parenting style. Jacob was different. He didn't enjoy loud crowds, and he was often content with quieter activities like puzzles or drawing. But Emily loved him just the way he was, and no amount of unsolicited advice from her mother would change that. "He's fine, Mom. He has his own pace," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm sure he'll enjoy himself tomorrow." "Good, just make sure you're on time. Vanessa and the kids will be there too. It'll be good for Jacob to spend time with other children." Emily stiffened at the mention of her sister, Vanessa. She loved her family, but there was always an underlying tension when it came to Vanessa's parenting. Vanessa, with her perfect blonde ponytail, designer clothes, and always spotless children, seemed to have it all together. Vanessa was loud, outgoing, and very social, traits that her children mirrored. Emily, on the other hand, often felt like she was trying to juggle everything and keep up. "Yeah, I'll make sure we're there early," Emily said, forcing a smile. "Good, we'll be waiting. Just remember, no more of this quiet time nonsense with Jacob. He needs to learn how to be around people more." Carol's voice trailed off with a slight chuckle. Emily hung up, shaking her head. Her mother's words lingered in her mind, but she pushed them away. Tomorrow was supposed to be fun. A trip to Universal Studios, a birthday celebration for Lucas, the son of Vanessa and her husband. She tried to focus on that as she returned to her son, who was now holding up his completed T-Rex puzzle with a satisfied grin. "Look, Mom, I finished it all by myself," Jacob exclaimed, his voice filled with pride. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with love for him. "That's amazing, Jacob. I'm so proud of you," she said, bending down to give him a hug. Just then, Emily's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Vanessa. "I'll stop by at 6. Lucas wants to see Jacob. Let's go over the schedule for tomorrow." Emily quickly typed a response. "Okay, but I have a work call at 2 tomorrow. It might take 30 minutes. Vanessa's reply came almost instantly. "Don't worry, Mom and I will look after Jacob. You focus on your work." Emily felt a twinge of gratitude, mixed with a bit of anxiety. She knew that Carol and Vanessa would look after Jacob, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their idea of watching over him often included more critiques than care. Nonetheless, it was reassuring to know that at least she wouldn't have to worry about him while she was on the call. The evening went by quickly, and soon it was time to get ready for the trip. Jacob, now excited and anxious for the big day ahead, bounced around the apartment, packing his small bag with his favorite toys and books. Emily watched him, trying her best to suppress her own anxiety. She just wanted everything to go smoothly. She prayed silently, "Please let everything be okay tomorrow." The morning of the trip arrived, and the sun shone brightly as Emily, Jacob, and the rest of the family arrived at Universal Studios. The excitement in the air was palpable, children's laughter echoing across the park as families gathered to begin their day of adventure. Emily held Jacob's small hand tightly, leading him through the bustling crowds. The park was as vibrant and crowded as ever, filled with people eager for thrills and excitement. But as they walked toward the entrance, Emily couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her chest. This was supposed to be a fun day, a time for her to unwind, to see Jacob smile, to enjoy a day away from the pressures of work and parenting. Yet deep inside, she felt a growing sense of unease. As they stood near the entrance, waiting for the rest of the family to gather for a group photo, Emily noticed Jacob's nervous expression. He wasn't as excited as the other children, and it was clear to her that he was feeling overwhelmed by the crowds and the noise. "Jacob, it's okay," Emily whispered, gently pushing his shoulders back to get him to stand up straighter. "We're going to have fun today. Just smile for the camera." She flashed him her best reassuring smile, hoping it would calm his nerves. The photo was taken, and the day officially began. They made their way through the park, visiting a few attractions. Jacob's face lit up as they arrived at his favorite ride, one featuring his beloved anime characters. Emily's heart warmed as she watched her son's excitement, his nervousness momentarily forgotten as he immersed himself in the world of his favorite characters. But little did Emily know, the events of the day were about to take an unexpected and unsettling turn that would change everything. The moment of panic. The morning seemed to carry on in an unbroken blur of excitement and joy, but under the surface, Emily couldn't shake the unease in her chest. She watched as Jacob's small hand tightened around hers, his soft steps falling in time with hers as they navigated the crowded walkways of Universal Studios. The park was alive with the laughter of children, the sharp cries of excitement from the roller coasters, and the whir of thrill rides that filled the air with their electric energy. It was everything a child could dream of, except, for Jacob, it was all a bit too much. He had always been sensitive to loud noises, big crowds, and fast-moving crowds. While other kids ran excitedly to the next ride, Jacob would often stay behind, his eyes wide, his movements slow and deliberate. Emily watched her son's face carefully, knowing how easily he could become overwhelmed, and it made her heart ache. "You okay, sweetie?" Emily asked softly as they approached the next ride. She glanced over at Jacob, hoping he wasn't too anxious. Jacob gave her a tight-lipped smile, the nervousness barely hidden behind it. "Yeah, Mom. I'm okay," he answered, though Emily could hear the slight tremor in his voice. Emily bent down to his level, placing a gentle hand on his small shoulder. "We don't have to do everything today, you know. If something scares you, we can skip it and just relax for a bit." Jacob nodded, though she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. She couldn't blame him for feeling unsure. This wasn't exactly the place for someone who preferred quiet, solitude, and smaller spaces. And as much as Emily loved seeing him excited, She wasn't blind to the fact that the crowds were too overwhelming for him. They joined the rest of the family, who were enthusiastically discussing which ride to hit next. The adults chatted excitedly, laughing at each other's jokes and planning their next moves. Emily stood back slightly, feeling disconnected from the conversation, while Jacob nervously clung to her side. Soon enough, the decision was made to head over to Splash Mountain. Emily's heart sank when she realized that it would be another long wait in line. She quickly glanced at the time. 12:30 p.m. The client call she had been expecting was already pushing closer to its new schedule, and the urgency of work loomed overhead like a weight. She planned to handle the conference call at 1:00 p.m., and the family had agreed they would handle Jacob until she returned. "I'll only be a little while," Emily reassured Jacob, giving him one last kiss on the forehead. "You'll be fine with Grandma and Aunt Vanessa. Ava and Lucas will be there too." Jacob's face was anxious, but he nodded, his eyes shifting toward his cousins, Ava and Lucas, who were already rushing ahead to the line for the ride. Emily could see how hard it was for him to keep up with their pace, loud, fast-moving, always talking. But he wasn't complaining. He never did. She trusted Carol and Vanessa to look after him, though she still couldn't shake that gnawing worry in her gut. "Remember, you have your emergency phone with you, okay?" Emily said, slipping the small phone into his pocket, hoping it would ease her mind. "If anything happens, call me right away." Jacob gave her a small smile, his voice soft as he said, "Okay, Mom." But she could tell it didn't reassure him as much as she wished it did. With a deep breath, Emily turned away from her son, hurrying toward a quieter area of the park where she could set up for the conference call. She tried to push aside the feeling of unease, telling herself she was just being paranoid. She needed to focus on work, especially with her important client. This was a rare opportunity, and she had to handle it. As Emily set up her laptop, her mind raced. The call started without incident. She answered questions, gave updates, and walked her client through the changes to her design proposal. But her mind was never fully in the meeting. It was still on Jacob. Was he okay? Was he enjoying himself? Was he overwhelmed by the crowds? She found herself constantly checking the time, then checking her phone to see if there were any updates from the family. It wasn't until the meeting wrapped up at 2:00 p.m. that Emily realized she hadn't heard a word from anyone. Her stomach clenched with sudden panic. She glanced down at her phone and saw a missed call from Carol and a message from Vanessa. Her heart sank. Something was wrong. Before Emily could read the message, her phone vibrated again. It was Jacob's emergency phone. With a sharp intake of breath, she answered the call. "Jacob?" Her voice trembled with a mix of concern and fear. "Mom," came Jacob's voice, fragile and small. "I'm alone." For a moment, Emily's world seemed to freeze. The sounds of Universal Studios faded into a muffled blur as the reality of the situation hit her like a wave. Her stomach churned, and her breath caught in her throat. "Where are you, honey? Where are you?" she demanded, struggling to keep her voice calm. "I'm at the entrance. Grandma left me." Jacob's voice quivered, and the words sliced through her like glass. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. "Stay there, Jacob. Do not move. I'm coming right now," she said, her legs already propelling her toward the exit, panic beginning to rise. She quickly dialed Carol. "Where's Jacob?" she asked, her voice laced with anger and fear. Carol's response was shockingly nonchalant. "Oh, Emily, don't worry. He's at Splash Mountain with Ava and Lucas. He's fine." "No, he's alone at the entrance. He called me." Emily's voice cracked. The mix of fury and fear was almost unbearable. But Carol's response only added fuel to the fire. "Oh, Emily, calm down. He'll be fine for a few hours. We'll find him soon." Emily's mind was racing now. How could this happen? She had trusted them. She had trusted her family to look after Jacob. How could they have left him behind without even realizing it? Ignoring the growing ache in her chest, she hung up, desperation making her hands shake. She called Vanessa. "Where's Jacob?" she asked urgently. Vanessa answered the phone coolly. "Isn't he with Mom?" she replied with a hint of annoyance. "No, he's alone at the entrance," Emily almost screamed, the panic starting to crack her composure. Vanessa laughed dismissively. "Well, my kids would never be left behind. I don't know what you're worried about." Before Emily could say another word, she ended the call, her heart pounding in her chest as she ran toward the entrance of the park. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. She had trusted them. And now her son was alone, scared and waiting. The crowds at Universal Studios seemed to multiply as she pushed through them, her vision blurry with the rush of panic. Her legs burned, but she didn't stop. All that mattered now was getting to Jacob, and the thought of what he must be feeling alone in the park made her legs move faster. Finally, as she approached the entrance, she saw him, a small, lonely figure sitting on a bench, hugging his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Jacob!" Emily cried out, her heart flooding with relief and sorrow all at once. The moment he saw her, Jacob stood up, his small body trembling as he rushed into her arms. "Mom!" he sobbed, clinging to her as if he could never let go. "I'm here, baby. I'm here," Emily whispered, holding him tight, the weight of everything pressing on her chest. She never wanted to let him go again. At that moment, Emily realized the full impact of her family's actions. She had always been the one to shoulder the burden of caring for Jacob, yet in that moment of crisis, it was her, and only her, who could provide him with the safety and comfort he needed. This experience had taught her that no matter how much she tried to share the responsibility with others, in the end, it was her love, care, and presence that mattered the most. It wasn't just about being there for a picture-perfect moment. It was about being there when things went wrong, when things fell apart. And that was the real meaning of family. The unexpected lesson. The relief that flooded through Emily as she held Jacob in her arms was overwhelming, but it didn't erase the deep ache that had settled in her chest. For a moment, as Jacob clung to her, Emily just stood there, letting the busy world around her fade into the background. She could hear the laughter of children, the sound of the park's attractions, but all of it felt so distant now. The only thing that mattered was Jacob, his trembling body slowly relaxing in her embrace. "Mom," Jacob sobbed softly, his tears soaking into her shirt. "I thought you weren't coming back." "I'm so sorry, Jacob," Emily whispered, holding him tighter. "I will never leave you like that again, I promise." They stood there for what felt like an eternity, the world moving around them. But Emily felt as though time had stopped. It wasn't until a voice interrupted their embrace that Emily remembered where they were. "Are you both all right?" A man in a uniform approached them, his tone professional yet warm. He was a Universal Studios security manager, Michael Foster. Emily looked up, her heart still racing, and nodded quickly. "Yes, we're fine. I'm sorry. My son was left behind. Emily stumbled over her words, still processing everything that had happened. "Don't apologize," Michael said with a reassuring smile. "We noticed him sitting here, looking upset. We just wanted to make sure he was safe. Are you okay now, Jacob?" Jacob nodded hesitantly, his face still streaked with tears. "I just didn't want to be alone," he said softly. Emily's heart broke again. How had this happened? How had she let herself trust that her family would look after him? She tried to gather her composure, still holding Jacob close. Michael continued, "If you need a place to sit and calm down, we have a quiet room for situations like this. Just a place for you both to relax." Emily nodded gratefully, the last vestiges of panic starting to fade as she followed the security manager. He led them to a small VIP room behind the scenes of the park, where there were soft sofas, bottled water, and even toys for Jacob to play with. It was a simple room, but it felt like a refuge from the chaos of the park. Emily sat down, Jacob curling up beside her, his head resting on her shoulder. For a moment, she just sat there, breathing deeply and letting herself settle into the quiet. "Do you want some water, Jacob?" Emily asked softly, pulling herself together as she spoke. Jacob nodded, taking the bottle from her hands and sipping it slowly. The silence between them was filled with unspoken words. Emily could feel the weight of the situation, the failure of trust that had hurt both her and Jacob. But there was also something else in that silence, something that, despite the pain, gave her hope. She had learned something in those frantic minutes running toward him, something deeper than just the panic of a mother trying to save her child from harm. She had learned that no matter how much she tried to rely on others, it was ultimately her responsibility to protect Jacob, to listen to her gut, and to never ever let go of her own instincts. Her love for Jacob wasn't just about the big moments, it was in the small ones too. The moments when things went wrong, when everyone else failed, it was her job to pick up the pieces. "Jacob," Emily said quietly, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead, "I want you to know that you're never alone, okay? I'm always going to be here, no matter what happens." Jacob looked up at her, his eyes still a little red from crying, but a small smile began to form. "I know, Mom. I'm okay now." The words struck her like a quiet revelation. "I'm okay now." Jacob wasn't angry, wasn't resentful. He was still just a little boy, trying to make sense of the world. And somehow, despite everything, he had forgiven her for what had happened. They sat in that quiet room for a while longer, and as the minutes passed, Emily started to feel the weight of the earlier frustration dissolve. Her heart was no longer racing, and her mind was beginning to clear. There was no need to explain to Jacob what had happened, what her family had done. She just needed to be present with him. That was all he needed from her. After a while, Emily stood up and helped Jacob to his feet. "What do you say we go find the rest of the family?" she asked, smiling at him as he wiped the last of his tears away. "I think I'm ready now, Mom," Jacob said, his voice more certain than it had been all day. As they walked out of the quiet room and back into the bustling world of Universal Studios, Emily realized that everything she needed to teach Jacob wasn't about how perfect the day was or how much fun they had, but about how to handle the moments when things go wrong. How to be resilient in the face of uncertainty, how to trust each other, and how to find strength in the moments that hurt the most. By the time they found the rest of the family near one of the attractions, Emily had already begun to shift the perspective she had carried with her for so long. Her mom had always said, "You're spoiling him, Emily. He needs to be more social, more active, more like everyone else." But today, Emily understood that Jacob didn't need to be like anyone else. He didn't need to change. What he needed was to feel loved and accepted for who he was. Vanessa, Carol, and the kids were standing by, looking a little nervous when they saw Emily and Jacob approach. Emily smiled, her face calm but her heart resolute. "Is everything okay?" Carol asked, her tone tentative now. "It's all okay now," Emily replied. She held Jacob's hand tightly, and for the first time that day, it felt like everything had fallen into place. As the family began to gather again, Emily's thoughts settled into a quiet clarity. She had learned something invaluable today. No matter how hard we try to fit into the molds others make for us, true strength comes from being who we are. And in the end, that's all Jacob ever needed. "I won't leave you alone again," Emily whispered to Jacob as they stood by the next ride. He smiled up at her, his small hand warm in hers. And for that moment, amidst the chaos of the theme park and the noise of the world, everything felt right. This story emphasizes the emotional growth of both Emily and Jacob, delivering a powerful lesson about love, responsibility, and the importance of staying true to who you are. It reflects the enduring bond between mother and child, even through difficult and unexpected circumstances. So this concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.